Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT show. From all of you in Scotland and around the world, a very, very warm welcome indeed. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 exciting minutes. You know, it's been another great day for British democracy. Each and every day almost brings a new story of Westminster corruption. So it's no surprise to learn that in the Queen's speech, that a photo ID will be required in order to vote in the future. Now think about this. How many people do you know who don't have a photo ID? Maybe don't have a driver's license. Maybe don't have some sort of bus pass, whatever. I don't know. They just don't have it. And how does it affect other forms of voting? I mean, it sounds like something which is intended to achieve the very opposite of what it claims to achieve. Because what it claims to achieve is to make voting fair. Now think about this. This is from the guys who poured copious amounts of dark money into the Scottish elections to produce Facebook ads that were targeted at people and recommended that they vote tactically. A lot of people benefited from that, not just conservative MSPs, Labour and Lib Dems as well. And they spread it around like it was going out of fashion. Now they're talking about trying to make elections fair. Oh, and incidentally, there's a plan to completely cast aside the Fixed Parliaments Act. Now, this is from a bunch of guys who claimed only last week that there should be no focus on constitutional matters during a pandemic. Bingo, a week later, we're into constitutional matters. As they say in the States, go figure. So thanks for joining us this evening. Tonight, we are not talking to some of the people who frequent this show, mainly middle-aged guys. We've got a very, very different guest joining us this evening, and I'm delighted that she's able to join us. It's Jem Donnelly. Now, Jem has been on a special journey. Now, I know many of you think, hey, I've been on a special journey. Well, you should listen to a few of what Jem has to say, because we'll be looking at her journey, what it meant to her, what it might mean to you and your children and grandchildren. So we'll be talking about that and so much more besides. And we're taking your questions live. Oh, by the way, let me put in a plug right at the beginning. I'll also do this at the end. Right now, there's an Indie Live fundraiser in process. I strongly recommend, please, go to the Indie Live pages and whatever you can spare, send it to the fundraising facility and send your donation, please, because it makes a huge difference. Because remember, what you're watching tonight, there's no license, it's all free, and it's live. We're taking your questions live tonight, and it's free, and it's Indie Live. What could be better? Now, to our special guest tonight, Jem Donnelly. Jem, how are you coping with the pandemic?
Well, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I don't know what month it is. I don't know what year it is. I generally feel like we're back in 2020 some days, or we've never left 2020, to be honest. I think being in the pandemic and this lovely journey of COVID-19, or the coronavirus, as other people call it, you kind of feel like you're in a time warp and you don't know how to escape it. I think it's just really fascinating how the world has stopped at moments. Like the world has literally stopped. Like this time last year, like, you know, I think back in Venice, like there was dolphins in the water. You know, there's deer coming out from the woods, walking about the streets and everything like that. The world literally stopped last year, and I think we're kind of back on the recovery, but I think we've all learned that it doesn't matter what we think is happening. It's tomorrow we could wake up to a completely different situation.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about yourself, Jem.
I am 26 years old. Sometimes I feel like 62 years old. I am a HNC radio broadcasting student at the City of Glasgow College, all online, of course, because of the lovely pandemic. I have 3 children, 1 9, 1 7, and 1 3 years old. So I'm a freelancer in the creative media industry, and I'm also a pro-independence person for Scotland, of course. and I'm an activist, and I've been heavily active in my activism since I was about 16 years old. Even before I really understood what I was doing, it was that gut feeling, that there was something not right and we needed to change things. And I very much vocal about my opinions, but I also like to make sure that I'm fair when I say things. I always want to make sure I get as much facts as possible. And if I get something wrong, I would love somebody to correct me or give me as many facts as possible, because you can't solve things unless you understand every side of the story, essentially.
Yeah. Now, so you're 26, you've got 3 kids, you're a full-time student as well. How do you cope?
I don't. Like, I think everybody's kind of just, had to force themselves through the pandemic. Like, nobody's quote unquote coping, they're just dealing with things. I think once once the pandemic's over, the country's healed and stuff like that, that's when the real, processing of what we've all been through, because we've essentially took a shock to our system. And I don't think anybody's coping, like, especially mental health wise. Like, I think everybody in the world's mental health has been affected in some shape or form, with the world literally closing down. Like, you know, it's been it's been over 100 years since the last time a virus or an illness has essentially stopped humanity in its
Yeah.
tracks. So
Yeah, that was the so-called Spanish flu back in 1918, which had the most extraordinary effect. I mean, but the circumstances were different. I mean, it was spread throughout the UK by troops coming home, and it affected, oddly enough, only people between sort of 18 and 30. So it wiped out, it orphaned entire families, because the mum and dad died, the grandparents were still there, and of course the kids were still there. The second wave wiped out most of the grandparents. So it was a very odd set of circumstances. And of course, people who served on the battlefields went back to India, Pakistan, Asia, and took the virus with them, which is almost a repeat of what we're seeing now in many ways, where India is badly affected, but other places seem to be recovering, or at least slightly recovering. So, I mean, I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes. 3 kids, a student. Do you have any time for yourself? Doesn't it work that way?
The short answer, no. Like, I've got lots of time. Like, everybody's had lots of time to be alone, but being a time for myself isn't the same as what it would have been if you asked me a year ago. Like, I can't, even if I have quote unquote alone time, I'm basically in my house a lot, or I'm just going for a walk. Like, that's my big highlight of the day type of thing. You can't exactly go out and do the things that you could have done over a year ago. If you had time by yourself, you couldn't go out with friends or anything like that. Only recently now you're allowed to even just sit inside a pub, if you know what I mean. Like, only recently, like, I think as of next Monday, you're allowed to have people really it's outside your bubble visit your house, or you can go to the cinema and stuff like that. So normality somewhat is coming back now, but even when I've got quote unquote alone time, like, you kind of just have to sit and think. Like, there's nothing for me to do. Like, I've went and done my essential shopping. I've came back home. That is it.
Yeah.
And for a long time, like, schools and that weren't open, so I always had a child with me. Even when I was doing college as well. So you don't seem to, even when you technically have alone time, it's not really alone time. It's more just a break before the next wave of excitement comes along.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I mean, I just find it absolutely fascinating. Now, thinking about education, because you're a consumer of education, right? You're on the sort of receiving end of the educational system, if I can call it that. What's your impression as a consumer? How well does it meet your needs?
I think there's a lot of ways to consume things nowadays. You can consume it through the internet, like, what we're technically doing right now through social media. And then you can consume it through the radio, TV, everything like that. And there's certain aspects that I feel like we're lacking with not just education, but with media as well. Because, for example, with the elections that just happened that weekend there, you seen how, for me, this is my personal opinion, you seen how, the Tories and the Labour and Lib Dems were talked to and interviewed and that. But when it came to like the SNPs or anybody left wing, it seemed like they were getting grilled and they were getting like kind of backed into a corner and asked to answer one certain question. Like it was all about independence. When I think, like, no offense, SNP's never been quiet about about independence, but the one thing that, like, especially the BBC was not portraying was SNP's like, look, we will deliver independence. We want to deliver independence, but right now we have a whole country to take care of because of this pandemic. And it's just weird how, two different sources of media can, report on the same subject and you can get totally different points of view of it. That it doesn't seem fair nowadays.
Mm.
It doesn't feel like what's supposed to be a neutral, unbiased, factual, reporting. That's what you're taught. Like in HNC, we're taught that because we cover journalism as well. We're taught to be neutral and unbiased and just report the facts. But it doesn't seem like, when you look at the BBC and all that right now, it doesn't seem like what we're getting taught is what's been applied in the real world.
Mm. I mean, I can understand why during your education there's an emphasis on acting morally and being impartial and calling out falsehoods. I can understand why at college and university that should be an important consideration to cover. But it seems to be, in practical terms, what happens is that the products of education establishments end up working for a media outlet where their whole future is determined by the editor. And the editor may well say, well, I don't care what you learned at college. This is our slant. In applying for this job, you need to accept that everything we do is focused or biased or slanted in this way, and you have to reflect that, whatever you've learned elsewhere. I mean, for example, I've spoken to people at the BBC, and I said, why don't you come on the show? And they said, oh, if I came on your show, that would be it. I wouldn't be able to pay my mortgage.
Yeah.
Just like that. Isn't that the problem, though, when people leave college? They have to join the real world.
I think that is the problem. When they leave college, they have to join the real world. And then it's like, we've been taught all this. Like, we've got qualifications. We've worked hard to learn art. Because I know people think that being in the creative industry sometimes is like a hobby. But, the creative sector is a very vast, industry. Like, there are so many different sectors in it. And when it comes to journalism or media or, broadcasting at all, it is a craft because you're putting your soul and effort, your hard work, and you're creating, like with radio, you're trying to create this atmosphere, you're trying to create this image with just your voice, and I think my lecturers now and other lecturers I've heard about are trying to create a kind of new age of what they want media to be. And I think, they've seen how the news has become unbiased and very biased and not unbiased, and how money can manipulate things. So I think they're trying to teach, right, if we can push out a new form of broadcasting, a new kind of breed of journalism and stuff like that, then maybe it'll help in the future type of thing. But only time will tell if we're able to really do that.
Is there any discussion, I guess there must be, but the question is how profound it is, about people starting up their own media?
A lot. a lot of people in my college course has started up their own podcasts and they talk about their own discussions. Like one person I know called AJ, he actually is a host at Cumbernauld FM. He does mostly music and that, but he shows what his beliefs are, and he likes to bring people together through his music and stuff like that. And I know Peter works at Cumbernauld as well, I think. But there's a vast number of people in my course that have political podcasts, funny podcasts, and it's all for different reasons. It's all about bringing people together, and I think that's the problem right now. As a student, myself and other people find it hard. Like, we're going through a difficult time trying to go through a practical course all online. Like, I'm going to get a qualification of a practical course and I can only count on one hand how many times I've been inside the studio. And I've had to do all my work in that from home. Thankfully enough, I've been able to piece together some equipment in that, but I've known people at my course, they've asked the college for help in that. And two people asked the college for laptops back in October. They didn't get them delivered till March. And they had all this practical work they had to catch up on, and they're drowning in it and they feel like they can't cope. And one person even wants to possibly repeat their year, if you know what I mean, because they feel like the college has let them down. Not the lecturers, the college, like, executives.
Mm. As you look around your experience of the educational establishment, if I can use that term, would you say that your fellow students are happy or unhappy with the way things are just now?
Myself, and other people I've talked to, they're not unhappy with the lecturers. The lecturers have had to go on strike recently because they were threatened with basically losing their job. The colleges across, and possibly universities, but I can't definitely say universities, but I know colleges across Scotland was thinking of replacing lecturers with instructors. And what the difference is tremendous. Lecturers give vast more information and teach more than what instructors would, and also instructors would get paid less than what the lecturers would. And there was even lecturers who were on 0-hour contracts said, if I go on strike right now, I'm losing my job and I need this job. So it was the college, my college personally, was making lecturers kind of pit against each other, like the ones that were going on strike and the ones that couldn't. And it was horrible because for a good 6 weeks, there was classes we were missing because our lecturer was on, strike, which they had a really good reason to be on strike, and it was not their fault, it was the college's fault. Like, our lecturers have had to put their hands in their pockets for us. They've had to go out and source things, come up with pamphlets by themselves. They've had to do above and beyond what they were supposed to do or even thought of to do, because I know that the college is getting the support from the government. The only way I could describe it is it's like in America where teachers are going and buying their own supplies because they've been so undercut funded, if you know what I mean. That is, and we can, like, the lecturers are not telling us they're stressed, but we can tell that they're stressed with all this amount of pressure put on them because they're kept in the dark like us. You would think that they would at least be let to know, but the executives seem to not even be telling their staff what's going on, and it's really shocking, to be honest.
It's particularly shocking if you're lecturing about communications.
Yes. It's like, I remember when we went into lockdown first last year, and because I was doing an NQ course in TV and radio as well, and it was just so, you could cut the tension in the air with a knife because everybody was terrified because nobody was getting told, okay, what's going to happen with our funding, what's going to happen with our lessons, what's going to happen with anything. Like, we were told, right, the college is shutting down today, and the lecturers didn't even know what was going on. I actually had to walk myself downstairs to the mail reception area, demand to speak to somebody, and I asked them, like, what's going on with our money? Will we still getting paid? What will happen with childcare? This was before we knew childcare was going to get shut as well. What's going to happen with the practical courses? And I felt sorry for the staff because, they were getting bombarded, and it was just like, the upstairs just seemed to have not cared. They seem to have just shut their door on everybody below them and just went, here, fend for yourself type of thing. So when I went back upstairs to tell everybody what was happening, it was a little bit of a sense of relief, but at the same time, we were like, when are we going to come back into this college? Like, and I completed my NQ course all online, virtual, had no idea what I was doing. I had to put a kind of film documentary program for my NQ course through an iPhone. I'm like, in normal circumstances, I would not have passed, but see, because we didn't have any of the equipment available, like we couldn't use any of the sound equipment, we couldn't use any of the recording equipment or anything like that. And our lecturers' hands were tied. They didn't know what was going on either. Like, executives weren't telling them what was going on, so they kind of had to just try and keep us afloat.
We've had a question from Jim McIntyre, which bears directly upon what you've just been saying. And Jim is saying, given that you're doing a media course, do you think your lecturers have picked up on the distance learning better than most?
I think, well, I do a radio course, so I'll just comment on this one. With the radio course, there is a silver lining that most of the people in radio is doing, like, their editing, their broadcasting from home, from their home studios. So they've took it upon themselves to teach us what we would be doing at home if we were fully in the industry right now. But they've been struggling as well because most of us don't have the money or the time or the access to get the equipment we would need to set up a home studio. Like, I'm lucky I've got a mixer, a condenser mic, I've even got another microphone, I've got, all the things that I would need for a basic setup. There's people in my class that don't even have a laptop, and they're expected by the SQA to run editing software, know how to work a microphone and everything like that when they haven't really been in a classroom.
That must be tough.
It is tough, and it's really heartbreaking to see my fellow classmates like scared for their own future about going, I've put my soul and effort into this course, learning everything, but because I'm not in a classroom, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like, that's just, because there's only so many times you can open up a computer, stare at the screen and be like, I've done it myself. I've, looked at the screen and I've been listening, and then suddenly I've zoned out. And then I came back 10 minutes later going, what part are we on? Type of thing. And our lecturers have been really great in trying to be as much support as possible. But there's only so much they could do with the limited resources they have and the limited help they have from the upper level of the college.
I mean, this may be a tough question to answer, but do you think there's much sign? Obviously, we're coming, hopefully, nearing the end of the worst aspects of COVID. Do you see any change of mood? Do you get any sense that people are saying, oh, things have been bad, but it seems to me they're looking up a little bit now?
It's a running joke in our class, like, hey, let's hope in HND next year we'll actually be able to go into the studio more than 5 times. Like, most of us haven't even seen each other. We have not been physically present with each other. So it's we try and make jokes like, oh, let's see if we can see your whole body next year, not just, your upper torso. But I think everybody's just deflated now. Everybody is so, exhausted with being on Zoom. And I know people are going to listen to this and be like, how can you be exhausted with being on Zoom? It's not that sitting in front of a computer is tiring, it's the lack of human connection. Because it doesn't matter, like, we're talking right now, but there is technically no human connection there because we're not sitting in front of each other, we're not reading each other's body language. This conversation would be much more animated and much more fulfilling in my eyes if we're in front of each other, because that's how humans interact. We interact with body language and everything like that. And a lot of people feel alone, and that is the problem. Like, when your head feels so isolated from the rest of you, and you feel like your world is just closed off, it's hard to interact with other people, and that's why people get so deflated, because your mental health is important. And I think that is one thing we've been taught over and over again with the 53rd lockdown we've been in so far.
Well, hopefully things will start to look up a bit now, because we've got, I hesitate to say this knowing the Scottish climate, but it looks like we might be getting some decent weather, and that people will be able to get outdoors, particularly kids, I'm thinking, but also everybody. And the relaxation that's on its way suggests that people will be able to go out for a drink and a meal, presumably if they can afford these things after lockdown and all the rest of it. So hopefully that will have an impact on people's mental health as well as their physical health, because I worry about people, not getting the chance to exercise in the way that they maybe once did. I'd like to move us on a little bit, if I may. You're not only a consumer of education as a student, you're also a consumer of children's services.
Yes. Basically, the kids have found it really hard being, they found it really hard being away from school and everything like that. And I think it was a bit about, learning, but I think it was mostly about, not being with their friends, not communicating with each other. Like, my older two, they understand that what we're experiencing right now is not normal. Like, that's not how you really interact. But my youngest, he's 3, and most of his nursery life, he has been quarantined. I've never seen the inside of my son's nursery. Like during this whole experience, like he's been to go into nursery all this time, and I have yet to see the inside of it. Now, if you told us back in 2019, like, oh, you're going to let your child go into an establishment that you've never set foot in before, it'd be like, are you crazy? Like, no, I need to check this place out. But now you've kind of got to just let it happen. Like, I've never been inside the playground. I have only dealt with their teachers with masks on.
Yeah.
So my son is so used to, like, from all his memories he's developing right now, my younger one, it's normal for him to see people with masks on. It's normal for him to have to wait in a queue so many feet apart from people. And that terrifies me. That really terrifies me of what especially the younger kids will be growing up with. Like, yeah, he goes in and the first thing he looks for is the hand sanitizer. Like, no offense, but in most of my life, I've never known a 3-year-old to want to sanitize their hands. They're usually running about the place trying to cause a havoc. But now him and other kids his age are like, oh, hand sanitizer before we go into a shop, and it's good, but at the same time, it makes me uncomfortable because what is the ramifications of the kids going into school and not allowed to interact with each other the way they used to? Because they've got to be in bubbles going in now. They can't just all go in at one time. And it worries me what it's going to be like in the future for them, if you know what I mean. Like, what's going to be, how are they going to interact with other humans? Is this going to impact them interact with other humans? Or is this something that we can fix fairly soon?
Well, a lot of people agree with you. James Reith is saying, look, as a driving instructor, I totally agree. I've worked 3 months out of the last year. Living in your own bubble for so long does have an effect. I and my missus are self-employed and struggled with the social aspects of returning to work. And we are social people.
I agree with James. I'm self-employed as well, and see trying to find work, especially in the creative industry right now. And when you say the phrase of "I'm still technically a student," they just go, no, no, thank you. We can't be dealing with that right now," which I can understand to an extent, but I think it is really hard on people that are self-employed or being employed. You know, and there's, especially in the hospitality field, there's so many people being out of work, and them trying to return back to work has been hard on them. But from my point of view, being self-employed is really hard as well, because you've got to try and put yourself out there in the middle of a pandemic, and especially if you're just getting fresh qualifications, you haven't got the resources to get the experience that you would need for other jobs. So you've got to try and convince people that you're qualified to do, you have enough experience and qualifications of what you want to do or what you're offered, but at the same time, try not panic yourself, like going, I've not actually done this in the real world yet. What am I doing? Because it sometimes feels like it's not real.
Yeah, a lot of it's attitudinal. I spent a lot of time in the States, and by and large, not always, but by and large, people take a very different view about whether they're experienced or not. They just assume that they're good enough, and they leave it to somebody else to tell them otherwise. We tend to take the view that, well, I'm not quite sure, but maybe yes, maybe no. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting this is easy. I'm just saying that that's a Melanie McCain is saying, you know, I work in football, usually 5 games a week, 10 hugs per game, 100 hi, how are yous, and 10K people around me. Last year, 1 hug. That's going from that to 1.
Especially if you're a hugger. Like, I'm a hugger with people that I really love and adore, and I am around 24/7. But see, I know people that are like, oh, I've just met you for the first time and said hi, can you hug? If you know what I mean. Like, I can only imagine what the extroverts are feeling during this pandemic. Like, I'm a bit of an introvert, and if I'm feeling a bit exhausted from it, I can only imagine what the extroverts are feeling, and I do not envy them.
So you're an extrovert, you reckon? How did that happen? Was that the way you were brought up?
Well, I'm actually an introvert, but I'm so good at putting on the facade of an extrovert. It's called anxiety, but I'm joking. But I think when you're working in the creative field, or you're a parent, or you've grown up in a situation like myself where I've had to grow up quite quickly and I've had a lot of things happen in my life, you've got to kind of put on this mask of I'm confident, I'm untouchable, you know, I can handle myself. Whereas, you know, when I go home, I'm very much under the covers, watching some TV, switching my phone off. Like, I've dealt with people today. I don't want to deal with people anymore. But when I'm outside in front of people, I know to put on that game face, as they call it.
Well, sometimes it's not such a bad thing.
It's part of the work.
Yeah. I think your mic is going off and on, perhaps. You're back on now, I think. Yeah, I mean, that's hugely interesting. I want to ask you a question about child rearing, if I may, because you're probably in a better position than many of the sort of middle-aged guys that are on the show. And no disrespect to them. I'm not saying all of them like this by any means. Maybe it's just me. Some of our guests on the show who are professional in terms of childcare have a deep and abiding interest, profound interest, like Susan Zirek and others. Their view is that, I'd like your thoughts on this, please, that it's probably better if kids don't start school until 6.
When you mean by school, do you mean the sit-down academic school, or?
Yeah, I'm talking about not nursery or kindergarten. I'm talking about formal schooling.
Yeah, I think that's where people get it wrong, because I think when people think, oh, we don't want them starting school till 7, they think, what, any school? So they've just to, sit and do nothing. It's like, no, when we mean school, we mean like sitting down at a desk. And I generally think that's me personally, I think that's a good way to go about it, because kids learn a lot through play and song. And, how do you learn your ABCs with, the everybody knows the song A, B, C, D, that song that's teaching us. And just because kids are not doing school as a like academic sit down at a desk school, it doesn't mean they're not learning. So I agree with like the likes of Susan and stuff like that. I don't think that kids should be forced to sit down and made to write, read, everything like that, because more European countries have this philosophy, and the way that they've found it is, see, in the 6 months after they've started at the age of 7, they've learned everything that some kids have, been getting taught at since, because you can send your kid to the earliest 4 years old here, you know. So I think it's really telling when 6 months into school, after they turn 7, when they learn all that in the same time frame as what our kids would learn in 3 years. You know what I mean? I think people sometimes forget that, and I'm not saying this in a bad way. I think sometimes people forget that kids are sponges, and they're very, I have a saying that you're born smart, grow up dumb. So you have an intuition to learn and grow and watch and develop and stuff like that. It's when you get older, you're just like, oh, you know, I don't need to learn any of this. I'm grown up, and suddenly that's, in my opinion, when you become dumb because you think that you're better better than a kid now. But I think if kids can learn 6 months time what we teach our kids in 3 years, 2 3 years, then I think that's quite telling as itself. And we're talking about some of the best education in the world. Like, I think Finland, if you correct me, Finland is one of the top highest uh, education boards in the whole of the world, and they have the same philosophy. You know
So
what I mean?
as a full-time mum, 3 children, uh, all under 10, you would be supportive of leaving formal education until 6 or 7.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's also with my kids. They were always brought up with, they could learn what they feel like. My daughter, she's more academic. She is very much, she will pick up a book. She's read 3 Harry Potter books back to front now. She's very book smart, and it's a case of she has this idea. If she wants to do it, she'll do it. My son, he is very intelligent with maths. Like my older son, he's very intelligent with maths and stuff like that. Took a bit of time with reading, but he's very savvy. He can build things, break things down, and stuff like that. And my youngest, you give him a bit of technology, he even knows how to work it better than me. like he, like there's things that he can do with the tablet that I don't even know what to do, and I'm only 26. If you know what I mean, and I feel old. So I think you've got to also let kids develop and kind of grow the way that they're going to grow organically. Like, obviously guide them, but I would fully I would fully support my kids play learning up to the age of 7 and then sitting down, because I think after 7 that's when they start to understand the concept of sitting down, relaxing, pen, paper, and stuff like that. Like a 4-year old being told to put a pen to paper, and they're just like, I don't know what to do. I just want to go and play a football, if you know what I mean.
I think there'll be a lot of people in the upstart movement and elsewhere will be cheering you to the echo right now, if they're watching. I want to move on to something else, if I may, and if you don't want to answer this, please don't. You've also been a recent consumer of the health services. You had a scare recently. What was your experience of that, Jem?
So recently, I had to go for operations and biopsies because I had my smear test and it came back with precancerous cells, and it would have developed into cancer. And they were a bit far along. And the reason that I'd like to make a point about this now is because not that long ago there was a comment made that the Scottish government wasn't caring about, you know, cancer treatments or big major treatments like that. And the NHS, I think we can both agree, the NHS is so far overworked. It is ridiculous that that they are doing so much work. But when I had my scare, and they brought me in quite quickly. They brought me in for biopsy. They, examined me. I went for an operation. I got help and support when I needed that. I was given helplines to talk to and stuff like that. And from when I was diagnosed with precancerous cells to when the operation to remove them all, and now I just need to go for checkups every couple of times throughout the year right now. it was about a month and a half to 2 months, and you know, 8 weeks isn't that long, but see when you're in that mentality of going, what is going on with me? It feels like forever. But the NHS did support me quite a lot, and I think this just shows that we need to protect our NHS more now than ever. Because during COVID, like our NHS is so underworked, they're breaking down. Like they're human beings at the end of the day, but they're striving to do everything for us. And you know, yes, they're heroes, but I don't think they want to hear that. Oh, well, we think you're heroes. I think they just want our support. And I think this is why I don't understand why people vote Conservative, because the Conservatives want to strip away in my opinion, want to strip away the NHS we have, instead of making it better or making it more available to people, or giving it the resources it needs. They want to strip it away. And even I have not yet met an NHS worker, from cleaner to surgeon, that has said, I want to vote Tory, I believe in the Tories. They're all like, do not vote Tory, do not vote Conservative. If you want to save us, do not vote Conservative. And I think that's very telling when we have so many NHS workers, and none of them want us to vote Conservative. Like, regardless if you're Labour, Lib Dem, Green, SNP, or anything like that, I think it's very telling when a whole organisation tells you, please do not vote Conservative. It is remarkable in my eyes.
So what was your take? I mean, thank you for sharing that with us. I take it you've had it all clear for the.
I've had it all
Yeah.
cleared out. Like, they've managed to remove all the precancerous cells. Like, I did. Thankfully, I never had cancer. Like, that's what I'm saying. However, they did say that what the smear test was designed to do was to, detect these possible cancerous cells before they turned into cancer, which would then be detrimental to my health later on down the line. So I'm thankful that I did not get cancer, and I caught it in time. But it was still a scary thought to feel like there was something inside me growing that could have turned into cancer and could have been really scary in my life.
Well, that's good. I'm so glad you've got the all clear. That's very good news. And you're obviously very supportive of the NHS, and
Yes.
you've told us you haven't met anyone in the NHS who is a Conservative supporter. In that case, how do you explain the results of the recent election in Scotland, where the Conservatives managed to hang on to the 31 seats that they had?
I think it was very obvious there was strategic, voting. Like, it was pointed out time and time again, there was strategic voting. And also, if you look at where the Conservatives got their votes, like, most the constituencies they got were mostly down at the border. So the people that live in the border already have a hard time, you know, eh, dealing with that, because they're attached to, they probably have family that come from England and stuff like that. And then in Aberdeen West, most people that come from England to work in the rigs live up there and stuff like that as well. So it really depends where it is on the map, and I think that has a big part in it as well. And also a lot of strategic voting. Like, in my constituency, I'm in Dumbarton, and it was made prominent that Tory voters voted for Labour, so that my constituency stayed red, if you know what I mean. So I think it was a lot of that as well, and I think it does have something to do with the area. But the Tories lost their seat over in Cumnock, I think it was. Yeah, so it can change. Like, people's thoughts and feelings can change, but it's still. I think what we need to understand is there's not been a Tory government in Scotland since the 1950s. Like, we have not actively voted for a Conservative ruling in Scotland since the 1950s. That's they're like 2021. Like, another 20 odd years, and it'll be 100 years, if you know what I mean, if we keep going at this pace. I think that's very telling in its own.
What's your feeling about people of my age? And let me put some context on this, if I may. It wouldn't be hugely unusual to find somebody of your age who supported independence, because the polls suggest that around about 70 or 75% of people under 25, under 30, stretching it a bit perhaps, are greatly supportive of independence. That proportion is almost exactly reversed when you get to 60 and above. What's your feeling about that? Does that make you mad, or do you just...
No, it doesn't make me mad. My dad's 71, right? Just for context, he was 71. He was born above a pawn shop in the Gorbals in Glasgow when the Gorbals wasn't the way it is now. It was, as my dad says, the real Gorbals. And this was back in the 1940s. And he was a very big Labour supporter up until like when the independent referendum first came about. But he's 71, and he said to me, like, when I voted for Labour was the way it was supposed to be. And what he means by that is my dad worked in the docks, he worked in the shipyards, he worked on boats, he worked on the cranes, so he was very much a labourer. He was what Labour stood for at that point in time. He said, but then Labour wasn't Labour anymore. They became too much like the Conservatives. And I only voted for Labour because I thought that was the best for Scotland, because that's all I want is what's best for my country and my kids and my grandkids and so forth, because it's my job as the older generation to set precedents for the rest of the generations and try and protect, after I'm gone, protect whatever legacy I left behind. And he's like, when the independence referendum came about, I was all for it. Now, my dad was in hospital when the first independence referendum came about. He actually checked himself out of hospital, drove to the polling station, submitted his vote in person, and came back to the hospital. Now, my siblings obviously told him he was being absolutely, completely bonkers when he was doing this, but he's like, I don't care. Like, I might not live to see another one. I'm doing it in person. So my dad went from an avid Labour supporter through and through red to an SNP supporter. And that's not to say SNP is better than anybody. Like, yes, I support SNP, but it was more the message of the independence. He felt like the independence was better for Scotland because he has been about for 7 decades and seen Maggie Thatcher. You know what I mean? He's seen all the Conservative governments that have ruled from Westminster. And he even said that Tony Blair was terrible as well, but nothing compared to the Conservatives. And he's like, I don't want that for my grandkids. Because he's like, I've lived through being ashamed to be Scottish. I've lived through, and I'm not saying that English people do this, I'm talking about Westminster. People from Westminster, like there was even one time a Westminster MP made the joke about Scottish slavery. And now, if we did that, we would be like, and I mean that we did that as a like, Scottish government did role reversed. You would see like whoever was First Minister of the Scottish government getting slighted across the newspaper, and it would be this big story about how dare they defy, like, disgrace Westminster and stuff like that. But but at the same time, it's acceptable for Westminster to make jokes about England enslaving Scottish people. Like, I don't understand how that is tolerated. And my dad thinks that a lot of people his age are scared of change because they're like, we've tried so many times over so many years and we've not worked and our voices have not counted. What's going to make a difference now? And I think that's the problem. Like my dad even said, that's the problem. People are so scared of change and they just want to be comfortable, and they're just like, right, well, we've put up with it for so long. We'll just have to put up with it a bit more, and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And we'll have to let the younger generation just take over. But as my dad said, you can't do that. They've got to set the example first. They've got to give us the tools to carry on in the future with.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that over time, the demographics of these young people who were SNP supporters when they were sort of younger move into become older themselves, and they tend to keep that sense of commitment. I mean, and particularly the SNP's now been in power for over a decade.
Yeah.
So that becomes entrenched in the same way that voting Labour was entrenched for your father at one stage. Voting SNP is now entrenched for a whole bunch of people. And the demographics are such that, you know, I don't want to be indelicate, but the people at the other end are falling off. Just the simple facts of life. You know, people don't live forever. But we could have a situation, and this is, I would like to ask your view on this, please. The SNP, by and large, take the view that nice and steady, and we'll get there, and we'll have a referendum, and it will be positive, and we can then reshape the Constitution, the constitutional settlement. People on the other side say, no, that's too cautious, because, well, you might not particularly like to change things right now. Change will be forced on you by Westminster. They'll come at you. The fact that you want to take your time and be studious and be thoughtful might not be afforded. You might not be afforded that time because the internal market legislation, the Queen's speech, all of these suggest that the government in Westminster is not prepared to be cautious and thoughtful and take its time. What's your answer to that? Is the SNP being too cautious, do you think?
I think right now they're trying to do what they think is right. And I think right now what everybody needs to take into consideration, we need to get this country back into healing after a global pandemic. But I think also with the part of SNP that everybody's voting for is for the independence referendum. And I think the last time we held independence referendum leading up to it, we were all very positive and loving and caring. And that's great and all. But I think the independence community was flawed on one thing. Our competitor wasn't going to be playing fair like us. Our competitor wasn't going to be nice. They were going to try and cut our throats at any possible chance they could get. And I think we focus too much on the positives, and people are more sure on the bad things than the good things because they always know bad things are going to happen. I think if we were more forthcoming with the downfalls of independence, like, you know, yes, it will probably take some time to, you know, build up our economy, and yes, it will probably be a bit of a struggle at first, but once we get through it, it will be better. I think people were unsure about what was going to happen with being part of the European Union, and well, we've now seen what happens now. But I think this time around we've got, instead of just being so happy, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be positive, I'm just saying we should be forthcoming with the possible side effects of going independence, be forefront, not like, you know, cram down the negative down people's throats, more of a, right, this is what can happen. This is probably one of the harsh realities of starting as an independent country, but it'll be better for us in the long run, if you know what I mean, because it will be. Like we, and people say, oh well, if you stay in the union, you know, you won't be facing uncertainty with the economy and such like that. We're facing uncertainty every single day because we're getting the threat of our powers to control some aspects of our own country being taken away from us every single day by Westminster. Like, Westminster's mocking not only Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales as well. Like, some people in Westminster think that Wales is just another extension to England. Like, how ridiculous is that you don't care for another country so much that you just generally go, this is mine now. And I don't think that it's just Scotland. get away from the unit. I think that all of us there should not be a union anymore, because a union is when all parties are agree and work together and stuff like that. It's literally Westminster doing what they wish. There's even the north of England that don't want to be part of England anymore. Like, they're just like, can we come with you? Like, Scotland, could we just join up with you? Like, we'll become the Republic of Northern England, please. And I think that is quite telling that, so much so that if everybody has a problem with you, you've got to look at yourself. And I think that's what Westminster is not going to do. They're never going to look at themselves and go, wow, we've created a problem for ourselves. They'll just point the fingers to everybody. And right now, because Scotland's making the biggest noise, in my opinion, they're going, you're being the ungrateful one. You're being the selfish one. You're being so childish. You should just be grateful for what you get. And it's like, but you don't treat us with any dignity and respect as part of this union type of thing. So I think time will tell, and I think we will. It's not, are we going to be independent? It's when we're going to be independent, in my eyes.
I think the opposition probably agree with you. Why do I say that? Well, if you think you're going to win a referendum, you agree to it, and you agree to it right away. And I suspect that was what motivated David Cameron back in 2014. And perhaps the reason he agreed with Alex Salmond that there ought to be a referendum is that he was fairly confident he was going to win. If you're not confident you're going to win a referendum, the last thing you do is agree. So a lot of this reticence, I suspect, is produced by fear, i.e. that London feels fairly strongly that they will probably lose a referendum. Now, you can't conceivably say no.
No.
But what you can say is no, not now.
Yeah, I find it funny that Boris, of all people, are like, it's very reckless to have an independence referendum right now. It's like, we're not talking about right this second, Boris. Unlike you, we're not going to drag our people during a pandemic through a referendum, something like Brexit, that you did in the middle of a coronavirus. Like, the country was literally falling to its knees at one point, and you decided that, hey, let's take us through Brexit, a hard Brexit that, no offence, the Scottish waters didn't exactly get the greatest deal out of that one. Like, we turned up a little bit on the short end, a lot on the short end, should I say.
This has been fascinating. I should have warned you that the hour goes very quickly, Jen, and we're almost through. And most of our guests say, oh, look, I thought we just got started, or we might be halfway through. Sadly, we've almost come to the end. But are there any brief messages you'd like to give to the people watching and listening?
I might be only 26 years old, but I'm a parent, I'm a student, and I am a citizen of Scotland, and I'm very proud of my country. I'm not anti-English, I'm anti-Westminster, because Westminster has done nothing but basically tried to cripple Scotland. And I believe that you don't need to be born Scottish to be Scottish. It's the pride in your heart and the blue blood that runs through your veins when you think of Scotland and you call it your home. So I think for us to take back and be proud of our country, we need to fight for it. So I think if you want to, whether our country fails or succeeds is down to us. I don't think Westminster should be the one squeezing us, basically. So I think time will tell whether we want our country to thrive or just remain under the control of somebody else that doesn't care about us.
Okay, good message. Thank you for that message. Appreciate it. Like I said, we're almost out of time, Jem. A big thank you for joining us tonight. It's been informative and, dare I say, educational as well as enlightening. Let me just say a big thank you to all of you out there for watching and listening tonight. As always, we have a formidable list of guests lined up for future shows. And you can see who's on in forthcoming shows by going to www.whatsonguide@whatson.scot. And you'll find all the details there. Next week's guest is very special, I have to say, and you're not going to want to miss this. London-based Professor David Edgerton is our guest. One of David's books is The Rise and Fall of the British Nation. Now, I can't believe many of you tonight won't want to know much more about that. And remember, he's looking at this from a London-based perspective. He's not an independent supporter necessarily. I don't know, I haven't asked him, but I suspect he probably isn't. So he brings a particular insight into the constitutional question. Oh, by the way, special plug, look out for my Constitution column in the Sunday National. You'll find it in the 7 Days supplement. And I'll be talking this week about how the British government aims to kill democracy. They've already pretty much killed decency and morality. Now they're aiming their fire at democracy. More on that in the column. And please, and I said this at the beginning, and it's worth repeating and underscoring, do support the Indie Live crowdfunder. Do it now before you get sidetracked going off to watch football or anything else besides. Spend a wee bit of time now. Send what you can to the Indie Live crowdfunder. You'll find the details on the Indie Live site. I would appreciate it very much indeed if you could just send what you can to support the folks on Indie Live. They do a great job. Unlike BBC Scotland, they do not spend £300 million. And they're live, and they produce shows like this. And if you've enjoyed this, support Indie Live, support the crowdfunder. And thank you again. A big thank you to Jem. And remember, and don't forget, it's been a great day for British democracy. Good night, everyone. Thank you.